Thank you. Okay. Today, of course, as always, Lili Nishmat Abderchai Avram Ben Ner Tzi V'Rachalea. We're in the middle of Parak Hay, the fifth chapter, which has been dealing with how you recognize things that prevent you from acquiring the midah of zehirut, which is vigilance, that you don't mess up, you don't do something wrong. We know that you can't do something wrong. We know about things that how you're supposed to stay away from things. But even if you do that, there's still things that could prevent you from accomplishing your goals. And that this chapter has been dealing with the mafsidei hazehirut, those things that prevent you from doing it, or maybe minimize your ability to do that. And what we're on in this printing, we're on page 32, 1, 2, 3 lines down, where the last word says v'chachamim zichronam livracha amru. If your printing has citations, it'll say avot parak gimel. That's because we're going to quote something from there first. Okay. What page is it for you guys? You got it? Okay, very good. We're all on the same page, literally? Well, almost. Okay, so page 32. This printing about 3 lines down, where it says v'chachamim. Okay. So the topic where he said in the beginning of this chapter, there are 3 main areas where we have to be aware that could diminish our ability to be vigilant. One had to do with the idea of, just look at the beginning of the chapter if you want. It had to do with day-to-day life. Life gets in the way. And I'm like, you want me to sit there and be vigilant all day long? I got to go to work. I got to drive. I got to get whatever it might be. And he discussed the fact that that's one of the easier ones, in quotes, to overcome. The second one, he says, is a little bit more difficult, and that had to do with what we called in English frivolity. There's nothing wrong with goofing around. There's nothing wrong with jokes. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says that a community should have badchanim, a person whose job it is to go to weddings and make people laugh. And what's that? But yeah, exactly. And remember, the first time I saw one, I was like, Dad, this is great. And it's really cool. You don't see them that often. Depends on the circles you travel in. Within the Hasidic world, you'll definitely see it at weddings. But in other words, there's nothing wrong with a good joke. I mentioned last week, I mentioned Adir Miller. Adir, yeah, listen to him, right? So he's crazy, but he's hysterical to listen to. So what is this talking about? This is where you're making jokes and fun of everything that we consider holy and special. Oh, please, the rabbis make everything up. Why do I need to do this? I can follow my own rules. It's a bunch of old men that made up these rules, and they kind of just fluff off everything. So if you take a look now, it says, "V'chachamim zichronam livracha amru, sechok v'kalut rosh margidim et adam le'erva." It's not only that it prevents you from acquiring the midah of zehirut or vigilance, but also what it does is it leads a person to, I'm going to translate as immorality, immoral behavior, which could also be whether it's illicit sexual relations or whatever. But in any case, we're going to use the catchphrase of the word erva for meaning immorality. Now, how? You mean if I send a joke to Mark, and I keep picking on Mark, I send a joke to Mark, or Norman happens to once in a while send a joke to me, it never happens. That all of a sudden is going to lead us down the path to immorality? Absolutely not. Of course not. But what does it mean? It's a kol bendat. Even though we all know that adultery and all these things that are associated with it are absolute red lines. Anyone who's got a brain knows that. And his heart is afraid to even come close to something like that. The person knows. I mean, if I by accident turn a light on Shabbat, is it good? No, it's not good, but it's not the end of the world. If that's the only thing I've ever done wrong in my life, then I'm in pretty good shape. But I know what is the red line of something in the area of immorality. I don't need to have multiple shiurim. It's pretty obvious, pretty clear. It starts to bring people closer to that edge, the more frivolity. And again, I'm going to read a few lines and explain a little bit more in modern terms. And it gets them closer and closer. The fear of crossing that red line will leave. Me'at me'at, slowly, madrega madrega, ad sheyagia el ha'avon atzmo b'yasehu, to the point where he will in fact transgress and do the action. What's he saying? I've mentioned, I think, at least many times over the years in various classes I give, and I don't remember if I've said it in this class or not. Before I became Rabbi of a shul, I worked in the business world. I was for 17 years involved in 2 different companies in the area of purchasing. I was the director of purchasing. And you can see very obviously when you're not in the construct necessarily of a holy institution such as a shul or a school, I'm using that term a little loosely right now, holiness, and you're in what Rabbi Schwartz, my Rabbi Alav Shalom, used to say, the olam ha'emes. You're in the real world. You're out there trying to earn a living. You see what people refer to as the slippery slope, where a little bit teasing, a little bit of lightheartedness, the parties, whatever it might be, eventually causes problems. When I first got married, I was resistant to wearing a ring because I never wore jewelry. Other than bling I used to wear, I didn't wear bling. But it became something kind of important because it's showing, like a married man. Didn't always mean something to a lot of people, but whatever. In any case, his point here is that whereas we know, if you ask anybody who's got a say, oh, is adultery okay? Or can I fool around with somebody because even though I'm married? No, of course not. But when we do certain things, it could lose that perspective very easily, and that slippery slope. There's an expression used in halakha. I'm actually surprised he doesn't mention it here. He mentions it later in the book. Ein apotropos la'arayot. There is no guardianship when it comes to immorality. Just because a person is a very good individual and they're shomer Torah mitzvot, just because they may daven 3 times a day and women might do harshat chala or be doing lighting candles and doing acts of chesed, does not ever guarantee crossing the red line of immorality. And we know that. Just open the newspapers if you got the stomach for it some days, and just read. Let's continue. How is this? Why is this so? I mean, if we know that it's wrong and it's really one of the worst things you can do, why would someone do this? He says, what is the main point here he's trying to make is paying attention, being aware of what's going on in your life around you. The more a person goofs around, again, we're not talking about banter and joking around a little bit at the office. Talking about where it could start to become the norm between, let's say, the person and a coworker. The more that gets involved, the more further away from their mind does the person go from the awareness of something's not right here, and sometimes before it's too late. When it gets to the point where the yir'ah, the fear of doing something wrong of that nature, is completely gone. 2 things. First, I was going to send it, but I'm just going to read it to you. There's a Gemara in Yoma. Let me just find it. I sent it to myself. It says as follows. Some of you will be familiar with this. Kid Rav Huna Amarav. Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, Kevan sha'adam avar avera v'shanaba. Once a person does an avera, and he does it a second time, hutralo, it becomes permitted to him. Gemara says the obvious question. I like that. I like that ring. It's okay. He says, hutralo salkadaitach. What, because you did it twice, now all of a sudden it's permitted? Ella nasa lo keheta. It becomes permitted in his eyes. What does that mean? So a person may do something, and first time they do it, they didn't feel so bad. The second time they did it, it wasn't also so bad. Nothing happened. Okay, all of a sudden that must be fine. I have a friend I grew up with. He's a year younger than me. I haven't seen him at least in 50 years. But you hear about friends over the years somehow. And at an earlier age, probably been his early 20s already, he decided he didn't want to be religious anymore. And how I heard the story, I don't know, but someone was talking to me. We were talking about people going off the derech, and he mentioned this as an example. He said that almost exactly these words. He said, I turned the light on Shabbat on purpose, and nothing happened. And I did it again, and nothing happened. So obviously, it's probably okay. I mean, it's exactly what the Gemara seems to indicate. Now, does that mean that we always have that approach? Of course not. We also know, echeteh v'ashuv, echeteh v'ashuv. A person says, I'm going to do the Aveira, but I'll do tshuva for it. You can't do tshuva for something like that. Generally speaking, if I say, so fine, I'll do X, but when it comes to Yom Kippur, I'll hit myself an extra couple of times, do an extra al-chet. You can't really do, I can't say for sure not, because there's almost nothing that stands before tshuva, but it's a little bit harder to do something for that. But generally speaking, you can't. That's one thing. Another thing, if you have ever dealt with someone who is an addict of almost any sort, there's almost always a progression. They maybe try X, whatever the X might be. And it's like scares them. I know I really shouldn't smoke this. I shouldn't take this. I shouldn't use that. I shouldn't do this. Very difficult the first time. Second time, it's a little bit easier. And then becomes like, unfortunately, second nature. That's the slope. This is exactly the kind of idea he's talking about here, where using cocaine, for example, is terrible for you. You know that. At the same time, person decides, this is really crazy, but everyone seems to enjoy this. It's cool. And he to use the parlance, he does a line. I think that's the way you say it. I'm pretending I don't know what I'm talking about here. And he had a good time. And the second time is still not as easy, but by the time third, fourth time, that's it. He's hooked, literally and figuratively. Same thing here. Next paragraph. He says, take a look and pay attention how difficult the destructive nature is of this frivolity. Now, I'm going to show you an example. I have to make sure I get this on the video this time, not like my last example where I missed it all in video. Take a look at this plastic half of an egg, right? And he has in his hand here a shekel. No, I'm not going to make it disappear. This is not a magic trick. Now, if I put I'm not going to really do this too well. If I'm trying to hold it up so it's on the tape here too. Okay, if I put the shekel on top of this egg, it stays there as long as I don't shake and I stay balanced, right? Now, what if I took 2 or 3 drops of olive oil? I was going to do it, but I said I'm going to start messing up the book. And I put them on there. Now, the chances of this coin staying fixed on there are almost zero. Why? There's something called viscosity, right? And the higher level number of viscosity, the lower number of viscosity is the difference of the lack of friction, addition of friction. It's a little bit of physics I actually learned from somebody many years ago. So when I try to do that, I will not be able to successfully leave that shekel on top of this piece of plastic because of the viscosity of the oil. It will not let it stick. Take a look what he says. Imagine a person's in battle and they have a shield. They're holding a shield. And oh, by the way, notice how I just did that. I'm holding a shield in my left hand, right? Why? Why? Because most people are righties. Therefore, the sword's in the right hand, which is also why it's not true for all ancient cities. But many ancient walled cities, your entrance is to the right. You walk in, it's right, because this way you come in with your exposed side, as opposed to your shielded side. Anyways, so you're holding the shield, and they're shooting their swords at you. They're shooting their arrows at you. Now, it's going to block it. It's going to protect you. But what happens if you also smeared oil on it? Now they're going to hit it. They're going to bounce off, right? Take a look what he says. Like a shield that is oiled, that will cause to misdirect and to fall any arrow shot at it, and shoots them towards the ground. It will prevent those arrows from hitting the person. Ken halatzon bifnei hatochacha v'hamardut. The same exact action is caused by this too much goofing off and lightheartedness when it comes to accepting tochacha. When someone says, you shouldn't do X. Ki baletzanut echad uvischok katon, with just one act of leitzanut or schok, yapil adam me'alav ribui gadol min hahitorut v'hitpalut. A person can very easily cause to fall away any divrei tochacha, any words that are meant to penetrate that person to try to wake them up. Mashalev mitorer umitpael beatzmo midei re'oto o shamo inyanim shiru el hachashbon v'pishpush maasim. I know that I'm supposed to do the right thing. I know I'm supposed to do mitzvot and stay away from averot. I know that since I'm a little boy. First of all, it doesn't mean I do and don't. Second of all, at least I know that if someone says I might be doing something wrong, or I hear a shiur and someone talks about a topic, say, I didn't know that I'm supposed to do X, or I can't do Y. Okay, so hopefully it enters my brain and I think about it and I try to do something about that. But if everything by me is a joke, wow, you want to go listen to a shiur, Mesilat Yesharim? Are you kidding? All these rabbis are going to do is tell you just don't do stupid stuff. And they made it up anyways. All that does is there's no way that brain, that mind is open to hearing anything that will be constructive and helpful. Same word as he used about the arrows. That any divrei tochacha, any in English, it's not English, but word of musar, any words of admonition, I think is the way you say it, of admonition will just kind of fall by the wayside as well. Anybody here ever watch any thing with Reb Amnon Yitzchak when he's talking to an audience, if you even know who I'm talking about? Okay. He's a guy, I shouldn't say guy, he's a man who is considered very kitzoni, very radical in some things. Extremely. He's an older Taimani guy with his payas down to his ankles. He wears not a turban, but something like that. He speaks to audiences that are mixed, either Chiloni and Dati or all Chiloni, and he says, ask me questions. Like, how do I know God exists? And why can't I do this? First of all, he's hysterical to listen to. He has people literally in the audience saying they decided this right now to do tshuva because of what he just said. It's unbelievable how he has able to reach the hearts of hundreds of thousands. I don't agree with a lot of what he says and does, but at the same time, nice music. That's the yeshiva. No, everyone's checking the phone. Was that my phone? Yeah. So he has this ability to get through to people. Look on YouTube. There's hundreds of videos of him. Rav Amnon Yitzchak. It's in Hebrew, but if you can even just follow the mannerisms, the discussions, he gets into people will shout at him sometimes. He's very calm, but he also has got a smile, and he is an interesting individual to follow. I don't know if you know, he tried to run for Knesset a few years ago. They banned him. They wouldn't even allow him to run, if I remember right. Anyways, so someone like that, let's assume for a moment you decide to go with someone to one of Rabbi Amnon Yitzchak's classes, not even a class, his talks, and the person with you says, oh, it's all ridiculous. He's always just making jokes. And so will Rabbi Amnon Yitzchak get through him? Maybe not. But for sure, the heart of this wall is built in front of you with the joking around and everything else. The heart is that words will penetrate. I know I mentioned this before, but it's important to mention again that the Kotzker Rebbe said, why does it say that the words in Shema should be al levavcha, right? Why does it be on your heart, should be in your heart? It's because not everyone's ready to hear what the Torah has to say. So the word should just sit there on your heart, as it were. And when your heart opens, that they'll fall in. It's meant to obviously as a parable. It's not because the person who's a jokester doesn't know that there's problems here and he lacks the knowledge. No, the guy knows that you can't do X, but because of all this late sanut, it brings him to this stage where it's just pushed away and his yirah is gone. The prophet Yeshayahu screamed at the people like a crane, C-R-A-N-E. I'm sure you've heard this terrible joke before, but years ago, one of my first trips here to Israel as an adult. So the tour guide was taking us around, and he pointed up, and we were in Shalim. He pointed to something, says, there's the national bird of Israel. It's the crane. Yeah, it was pointing to a building crane, obviously. But you go in Yerushalayim, it's all you see are the national birds. So he screamed at the people. Why? Huh? No, you did not. It predates you. Or everyone who's quoting you should be paying your royalties. See, there's another option. Because he saw that people did not allow any words of admonition to penetrate them. It made no impression on them. He says, don't act in ways of levity, because the bonds will be strengthened. Meaning the more you work at and practice this leitzanut and levity, more chance you're going to go down that rabbit hole. No, he doesn't say rabbit hole because he didn't know from Alice in Wonderland yet. So continue. וכבר גזרו אומר החכמים זיכרונם לברכה, שהלץ מביא הייסורים עליו. A letz. And let's is, I don't know what your English says, huh? A clown, a scoffer. A leitzan in modern Hebrew is a clown, correct? A comedian, but that's who they are. That's their personality. They're just like everything's a joke by them. Brings upon himself his own yisurim. What are yisurim? Things that go bad in life. Things that could be potentially. Now, yisurim could be as simple as you just can't get the top off the bottle. God forbid, it could be something medical. But he brought it about himself. Is what the pasuk says explicitly, that judgment is appropriate for those who are lighthearted or lightheaded. He says, remember, we talked about at the beginning of this chapter, the last chapter, that Hashem is the Dayan Emet. We said that Hashem, everything is taken into consideration. Every action that's good and every action that's not good. So the more that somebody is pushing away even the option for this ability of divrei tochacha to enter, the more he needs to be woken up. Now we think that, whoa, that's kind of maybe not fair or whatever it might be. So first, put fairness aside. No one ever said world is fair. No. Secondly, imagine the following scenario: the president of the United States decides that at his inauguration, even though it's freezing cold, he doesn't want to wear a coat because it's not very presidential. And he decides to go to his inauguration in a suit, and eventually dies about 30 days later from pneumonia. By the way, it did happen. Was it Cleveland? Grover Cleveland? Who was it? Taft?
No, Harding.
Harding? It was one of those. One of those guys, yeah. But okay, now, doesn't mean he deserved to die because he did that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that our actions have consequences. You know, if you're going to go outside in the middle of winter, like we are right now, right? This is real winter, horrible, terrible winter we're in the middle of now. No, but if you're in a real winter, you know, snow and ice and 40, 80 below zero wind chill factors, no, you decide to walk outside, just a t-shirt and shorts, and you spend the day outside like that, and you're going to get sick. That's just the way it is. You're asking for it. Someone who's really moved by investigating himself and thinking about life and from his learning, there's no need for that person to have to go through Yisurim. Wait a minute, there are plenty of people who learn Torah and they're good people and they live lives that are good, and they still have Yisurim. That's the whole topic of Tzaddik Baralo, Rasha Tovlo. That's its own discussion, which we'll sort of talk about, but that's way down the road. Kikvar Yashuv Mechad Tovtav, Beliza Mikoach Yehurei Tshuva, Shiavadu Bilvavo, Aide Mashikra, Shishma Mina Musarim of Tochachot. He's saying, look, you don't need to go through Yisurim. If you see you're doing something wrong, you read it, you'll learn about it. Someone tells you, change, do. Look, can we be perfect at it? Of course not, but you should at least change. Yes, Judy.
Doesn't
Doesn't some of it have to do with the way the person is corrected by his or her
Admonisher?
admonition?
Excellent, excellent. So let me repeat the question and I'll answer it. Doesn't it have to do also with the way the person being admonished? The answer is definitely. It says in Pirkei Avot, Divrei Chachamim Nishmaim B'nachat. The words of the rabbis or the Chachamim are listened, are heard when it's done, softly, pleasurably. The difference between, I don't understand. How many times do I have to tell you put on tefillin, right? Tefillin is a mitzvah. How can you be mevatel mitzvahs? And you start pounding the kid over the head who's 14 years old. Or, let's talk. Look, here it is. You were bar mitzvah a year ago, and you're not putting on tefillin all of a sudden. Okay, fine. Can you make up what you missed? You can't make it up. But let's go forward. You have another 110 years, 115 years left minimum that you can put on tefillin. Why don't you want to put on tefillin? Let's talk a little bit about it. Very different than being pounded over the head. I grew up being pounded, not me personally, but my generation, we got pounded over the head, right? As time moves on, and I had some teachers who were very good. They didn't pound you over the head. They really wanted you to make you love Torah and to really love doing Torah mitzvot. And then you had those who should never have gone into education or humanity. Oh, that was out loud and on tape. Great. So we have the situation where it's in the delivery. That's exactly true. Because you don't want to make someone feel bad. I had the situation I had one time where I went over to someone at Kiddush. This is in Chicago many, many years ago. I don't know if I was in the rabbi of the shul yet. I was the rabbi of the shul I grew up in. So I don't know if I was the rabbi of the shul or not. So it was a guy who I knew very well, a little bit older than me. I knew this personality was he always really wanted to do the right thing. It was not like, oh, don't tell me. He wanted to know. So I went over to him. He was making Kiddush. I noticed every week he'd take a shot glass of grape juice. I told him, look, I want you to know something. And I said, B'zeh Lashon, I know you want to do the right thing. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just comment on one thing. He says, no, please. So I told him, if you use whiskey, that's fine, because that's chashuv. There's a chashivut and importance to a shot glass. But if it's grape juice or wine, it has to be at least, because a revi'it, which is 3.3 ounces approximately. He thanked me. That he changed right away. Right away. Let me turn the tables for a minute. I was in St. Louis many years ago, and I went to shul, and I was already rabbi of shul. And I went to shul one morning, and I put my tefillin on. An older gentleman, probably wasn't that old, but to me at that time seemed old, came over and he says, look, I don't know if you realize, but you put your tefillin, you wind it on your ring. It's a chatzitza, it's an intervening substance, and you really shouldn't do that. And when you go back home, maybe ask your rabbi what you should do, if that's the right thing or not. I'm thinking, okay. So I said, oh, thank you so much. The next day I came to shul. I never take my ring off except on Yom Kippur. I took the ring off, put it in my pocket, and he came over and he says, I want to say thank you. I'm just so glad that I said something to you. I said it in a nice way, and I'm glad you accepted it. Thank you. Now, I never saw him again in my life. He never saw me again. But by the way, you can put it over your ring. Yeah. I did put it back on the next day. That's fine. But you can put it on there. But wasn't to make him feel good. But I wanted to give him the encouragement that if he has the ability to say something to somebody else, I could have said, what are you talking about? I'm a rabbi. I know what I'm doing. Give me a break. So it's not just in how you say something to someone, also how you receive the message from somebody. It's also just equally important. Okay, so I mentioned, yeah.
Them to give the wrong advice.
Correct. Yes, that's my way in life. And by the way, when you wanted to know if you could eat meat and milk together, I did say nice things about you afterwards that you can. And I blocked you on WhatsApp. We're even now. But it is very frivolous. You see how that oil just knocking those arrows off. Okay, I mentioned that this is going to be a shorter class. I have to get to Yerushalayim. So I'm going to stop here. I'm marking out. As of now, hopefully, Bezrat Hashem, if it's okay, we'll have next week a class. That was bad English, poor English. We will next week we will have a class. Hanging around too many non-English speakers, and I'll let everyone know on WhatsApp if we are not. And meantime, have a wonderful day. And I did say the Ilu Nishmat, by the way, beginning. And thank you very much. Amen. Amen. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.